Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in as we get your weekend kicked off early with the special Noontime Live here on Friday. We're going to start with former State Representative, former Deputy Secretary of State, now heads up Stages of Freedom, Ray Rickman, to give his big view.
Thank you. Never thought, I was about 12 years old yesterday, but I'm not anymore, in case you haven't noticed. And so I'm the second oldest, and so I have to take pride in all my brothers and sisters, all 5 of them, who are younger than me. My brother Wade, who's 52 years old, my little brother, he got appointed Dean of Culture, not at a college, but in an elementary school in Detroit. Can I repeat that? His new title, September 1, Dean of Culture. What is this about? New superintendent up from Florida, trying to deal with all the social problems, the angst in that system. That's separate from educating children. In the last year, teachers quit because 4th and 5th graders curse them out. Particularly like to use the B word in regards to teachers. And the younger the teacher, the more apt they are to call her the B word. So the superintendent, new superintendent, I like new superintendents, they're always fun. He calls in 4 or 5 teachers who are quitting over it and talks them out of it. And then in the process, he has enough sense to call in the young people who are accused of this and ask them, why would you call a teacher the B word? And to his astonishment, all of them said the teacher started it. That is, something was going on, and the teacher suggested that they were stupid, or something like that. Or the teacher mouthed something under her breath. Or it's her breath, because 90% of the teachers are now female in the system. And that's another question. How do you get males teachers in a system where half the students are males and they don't see a male teacher? But we'll talk about that another day. So he was shocked to hear these young people say this. And he called a couple of the teachers back and he said, did you say things under your breath? And that they could see you say under your breath. So the teachers thought either the student couldn't see it, wouldn't notice it, doesn't do sign language, whatever. And that in almost all the cases, the teacher, being the authority figure, had not used their authority properly and hadn't thought it out and have no guidance. And they're probably angry from something the student did 2 weeks earlier, and they're taking it out on the next student, verbally. And then the student is responding, because it's not like when I was in 4th grade. You wouldn't have called a teacher anything. Nothing. Dean of Culture, Wade Rickman. We need deans of culture at Hope High School and Central High School and Mount Pleasant and Classical. In Detroit, they're trying to figure out how to keep the students in class. Absenteeism is rapid. Absenteeism on teachers' part is rapid. They're trying to figure out how to get the little boys to keep their pants up above their waists. They're trying, and the list goes on. You know what I'm talking about. Now, Stages of Freedom, which I'm part of, does some cultural work. We're going to do more, because culture and having some goes right along with being educated. You have a great weekend. Hope to see you next week.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome in my next guest here, Peter Nerona, Democratic candidate for Attorney General. Thank you for joining us again.
Yes, Kate, good to see you.
As you've been out on the trail, we've pulled you off for a brief moment here to come into studio to give us an update, both what you're seeing and hearing from Rhode Islanders around the state. And we're going to talk probably some local and national issues as well. So you had a couple interesting meetings this week.
Yeah, I did. You know, I sat down with somebody who is interested in doing reentry work here in Rhode Island from a national nonprofit, and I think that's really critically important work. You know, when I was U.S. Attorney, we took a three-pronged approach to violent crime. One was try to obviously prevent as much crime as you could by getting young people a chance to stay out of crime, you know, focusing our efforts on those truly driving violent crime, and then making sure that when people got out of the prison, they were back into the workforce fast, because that prevents them from reoffending, and we're just in a much better place if we can manage that. And there's a national group that wants to come in and do some of that work, so really excited to hear about that. I think we need to invest more there, frankly, with probation and parole. We need to make investments there, because they're the ones who help returning citizens succeed. That was great. I sat yesterday as well with somebody who is interested in drug policy here in Rhode Island. You know, I had some candid conversations around Kristen's Law. You know, a lot of controversy about that, sort of where I come out on that. So, yeah, a lot of good conversations, policy conversations, part of the campaign. You know, great to meet Rhode Islanders all over the state about the issues they care about.
Let's talk a little bit about Kristen's Law, because we had several individuals in here on it as well. As you said, lots of different voices in the debate. You know, what do you say to those folks who do have the concerns about the sort of chilling effect? Obviously, there are other families that have been, and the communities obviously impacted by the opioid crisis. But those who said that that went too far, what do you say to those folks?
Yeah, look, a lot of those folks I've had dealings with. You know, Jody Rich and I collaborated on some good work when I was U.S. Attorney, and Peter Friedman's another one who signed that letter, you know, to legislative leaders about that bill. Here's what I say. You know, certainly when that bill first came out as requiring a life sentence, I didn't think that was the right way to proceed. Now that it's up to a life sentence, doesn't mean it will be a life sentence. That's an important distinction. There's a carve out for the Good Samaritans. It has to be something of value exchanged. But I think what it comes down to me is, do we trust the discretion of our prosecutors? And as somebody who exercises discretion every day as U.S. Attorney, I think we have to trust that discretion. I understand, though, the skepticism, and I think the way to address that is to continue to talk to people about the statute, continue to talk as we use it, and I really think that the number of times it gets used ought to be pretty limited, right? For me, it gets used in the circumstances where you have a significant drug trafficker who knows what they're dealing, that it may contain fentanyl, which is the real killer here, is not addicted him or herself, doesn't have a relationship with the victim. You know, so we're really talking about using that, I think, in a relatively limited, narrow scope of cases. So hopefully, as it gets used, and in some instances not used, you know, the confidence in how we use our discretion increases. But I understand the skepticism, and I think you can't reject it. You have to understand it exists and do your best to try to overcome it.
So let's talk a little bit about the role of AG, and let's talk a little bit about health policy as well, sort of maybe the intersection of them both. What we found out this week, numbers for UHIP burgeoning up now to $647 million. Now this is obviously the combination of state and federal tax dollars. Right. It originally was $119 million under Link Chafee. You know, folks are very concerned about these numbers and how it got to be this way. I mean, does there need to be an investigation?
Well, just as I was leaving as United States Attorney, if you remember, there were the office opened an investigation into Deloitte and sort of how the federal money was used. So, you know, I can't talk about why we opened it or what we were doing when I left. I don't know where it stands now that I'm gone. You know, certainly there ought to be an evaluation as to how we went from where we thought we were going to be to where we are today. You know, without sort of defending any of that, I do know, for example, when I became U.S. Attorney, you know, I was on a committee, I was on the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, and one of the things we were dealing with was a case management system that we were trying to bring online. We couldn't bring it online, and it cost $60 million, and you just have to decide, are you going to pull the plug on $60 million, or do you keep going? So this replicates itself around the country. So certainly some analysis of what happened here is warranted. I think the bigger issue, and you've reported on it, is making sure that the people who need benefits get them, right? We're talking about some of Rhode Island's most vulnerable people, and we've got to make sure that they have access to the benefits that they need.
And you raise the point, you know, clearly the ACLU has issued, you know, they have taken legal action for that very reason. So because of that, because of the folks not receiving them in the timely manner of that legal nature, does it then fall under the purview of the Attorney General from a legal standpoint to, again, as you said, you want an evaluation, but if there's legal recourse here for the Attorney General to get involved.
Well, there may be. I mean, as I said, one of our hook when I was U.S. Attorney was the fact that the federal money paid for a huge portion of this program. The question when you're whether you're the AG or the U.S. Attorney is, on the civil side and on the criminal side as well. This doesn't strike me as a criminal matter. Were there lies? Were there misrepresentations? Were things promised that shouldn't have been promised? And then sort of following up on that. But again, I always come back to this thing's got to get fixed. We've got to get the benefits to the people who use them. But yeah, there's no question that this has been a millstone around state government here now for far too long.
Okay, so wouldn't go as far to call for an investigation, but an evaluation.
Yeah, look, I think like anything, right? I hope to be the next Attorney General. I don't know that I'm going to get there yet. I'm working hard to try to get there. I don't want to prejudge anything, and so I think you have to be careful about saying we need an investigation without knowing all the facts. I will say this, when I was U.S. Attorney, there was enough there that we felt like we ought to take a look at it, and we started that process. Where that is in the federal side, I don't know at the moment.
And let's talk about something else that is under the spotlight currently, and of course this is the St. Joseph's Pension Fund bankruptcy. It's moving through the receivership system now, but let's also talk as well. General Treasurer Seth Magaziner has proposed legislation moving forward for more transparency, he said. But what of this particular case and these retirees? Is this something that the AG should be looking into?
No, it's the same answer, right? Two issues. The first one is I understand what it's like to live on a pension like that, because I have an aunt who lived on a 15-year cook's helper's pension at URI, right? She lived into her 90s. She didn't have children. My brother and I and my sister were like children to her. So I know, from my own experience with my aunt, that people who are living on a small pension really count on it. They really count on it. So that's the thing that's most incredibly troubling about it. You talked about the Treasurer's goal of making those pension systems transparent, because since they're not ERISA plans, people don't know many times what's in them. So part of it is understanding the problem, calling for more transparency, both generally and of course now we know what went on there. In terms of the investigations, again, it's the same question, right? Were there misrepresentations made, whether that be to the regulators, including the AG, or to others, right? And I think sometimes that comes out in the civil case. When I was U.S. Attorney, there would often be a civil action, and we might meet with some of the parties in a civil action or thinking about them to see whether or not there was something there for us on the criminal side or the civil side of the office to take a look at. Again, hard to prejudge until a lot more information comes out. Certainly it would be something that I'd be interested in reviewing were I the Attorney General, but without having the information, it's hard to say exactly where that would land.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about national issues that might pertain to Rhode Island. We've seen folks here. Let's talk about the new makeup of the Supreme, but potential new makeup of the Supreme Court. There's a lot of concern here, obviously, with Roe v. Wade and what could potentially happen in D.C.
Sure.
As Attorney General, we're seeing a lot on the side of folks legislatively wanting to get back in and codify protections here. What's your take on the role in the AG in this debate?
Well, I'm not sure the AG has a role there, but I will say this: I do think we should do that. I think given where this court is going, given where this president, the president has a litmus test. He stated that he has a litmus test on overturning Roe v. Wade. Given that, and given the state of the law in Rhode Island, whereas if you go back and look at where the state of the law is in Rhode Island, so for example, as I understand it, as the law currently stands, you would need spousal notification for a woman to exercise her right to an abortion. So there are lots of laws on the books that need to get fixed in light of the fact of where this president seems to be going with the Supreme Court choice. Now, we're going to have to wait and see as the Senate confirmation hearings play out whether this particular nominee lands. But again, the president has made enough statements during the campaign as to the kinds of judges he wants on the bench that he seems to be using a litmus test. And I think that's something that we should be concerned about, that I'm concerned about.
And another thing on the national level that we've seen, especially this week, is states versus federal oversight taking a look into the printing of 3D guns. We saw Pennsylvania try to take a look at it, but something certainly in the national debate. Do you think this will be handled at the federal level? Do you think the states will have any say in this? Well, do you think there'll be any oversight?
Well, there needs to be oversight. You hear about that issue, to me it's a common sense issue. And we can talk about the First Amendment. I heard the gentleman who who is putting these blueprints on the web talk about, First Amendment rights. And look, the First Amendment's a critical part of our Constitution, a critical part of who we are as a nation, but you've got to bring some common sense to it. When I was U.S. Attorney, we had cases where you couldn't buy a machine gun, but you could buy all the parts online. And I remember having cases where you could buy all the parts, and if all you needed was a drill press to make a machine gun, right? So we've got to bring common sense to this issue, and common sense to me is that these guns have to be regulated. You certainly don't want to make it easier for somebody who wants to do harm to evade detection, whether it be at an airport or a courthouse or any other institution where there's a metal detector for a reason. So yeah, this is a cause for real concern. And again, we're going from 0 to 100 almost overnight, right? They weren't being published. The federal government was fighting it. All of a sudden, they've settled it almost without notice, and it's a mad rush to try to get something in place. I think this is why, frankly, Kate, that attorneys general around the country are more important than they ever were, because in this case and many others, it's AGs that are going to court to stop or at least slow down some of these, I think, rash decisions that could impact all of us in a really negative way.
And so finally, I do have to ask you, because you're here in downtown Providence, these bird scooters that are on the street, put on the lawyer hat. I can't let you out because I have a top legal mind here that have the things that say you must wear a helmet, you must be 18, GoLocal has covered this, and we've seen that that's not the case. If someone gets hurt or worse, is this going to be an issue? Well,
I think it is, and I think, as a practical matter, look, as somebody who has kids, as adult kids, what do you do? What do you tell your kids when they go on a bicycle, right? Put a helmet on, right? I have friends who ride motorcycles. You have to put a helmet on. So yeah, I think this again one of those things that kind of appears out of nowhere, right?
It literally appeared out of nowhere. They drop them on the street.
Correct. They drop them on the street. In fact, I saw actually a guy I know pretty well riding one down a sidewalk yesterday. And I kind of looked over and was a little bit taken aback.
Not supposed to be on the sidewalk either.
And didn't have a helmet on, right? Yeah. So I think we have, again, it comes back to common sense, right? We want to make it safe for pedestrians, users, and I think it makes sense to build some regulations around that.
Clearly, we've seen other cities, Cambridge, Boston, others say, no, hold up, slow down.
Yeah.
And in the absence here, kids are whipping around, and if someone gets hurt, I mean, there could be some serious legal consequences.
No question about it, right? It's tragic. The young boy who died in I think it was Bristol, the last week or the week before, right? These things happen in the blink of an eye. It could be a teenager, it could be a child, it could be an adult. There's a lot going on, particularly in the city. As you know, you work downtown, pedestrians, there's just a lot going on in the city, buses. So yeah, I think it makes sense to again, slow it down. Let's see what makes sense. Obviously, that's an issue for city leaders, but I got to believe they're concerned about it.
Well, we'll see what happens moving forward, and obviously keeping an eye on your campaign. You're going around, you're meeting, you're talking with people. What can we expect from you in the next few weeks on the trail?
Yeah, just keep working hard. I'm getting all over the state. One thing that comes back to me, Kate, as I do this is how diverse our state is. I mean, you can be in Central Falls and Cumberland the same day or on different days and just see a very different tapestry of what is Rhode Island. That is our strength. I love that about Rhode Island. I saw some of that as U.S. Attorney. I've seen more of it as a candidate. I'm going to just keep working really hard to meet as many Rhode Islanders as I can. And I think the biggest part of this is, and again, it's a lesson from when I was U.S. Attorney. You got to listen to people. I have my ideas of what I like to do with the office, but to put those ideas in context, I got to listen to what Rhode Island residents think. So, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing for the last 10 months, and hopefully we'll get there in the end.
Okay, well, Peter Norna, I appreciate your taking the time
Thanks,
to come
Kate.
into the studio.
Good to see you.
Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Just had Democratic Attorney General candidate Peter Nerona here in studio. We're going to talk to the other side of the aisle. I've got GOP operative Colin Reed down in Roslyn, Virginia, inside the Beltway. Colin, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Well, we want to welcome you back to get your perspective from the national level. Looking here in Rhode Island, we are clearly full swing into the gubernatorial campaign here with Gina Raimondo on track, as she reported in her 50 days before primary report, to raise over $7.8 million in her re-election bid to be governor. What did you think when you saw that number, Colin?
Well, certainly money is one factor in politics, but in this era, it's not everything. And you can just ask Jeb Bush on the Republican side or Joe Crowley on the Democratic side about underfunded primary challenges that don't necessarily, the money is not able to overcome. But it's not surprising when you're an incumbent governor. The power of incumbency does bring many things, and one of them is the ability to raise a lot of money. But, you know, you can see by the flurry of activity on both sides, from both national party committees, that they're involved, and that means that the race must be close because they wouldn't waste their time otherwise.
And so as you look at the Republican primary here, and of course, former Trump chair Joe Trillo running as an independent, you know, what are going to be the differentiating factors do you see here on the Republican side?
Well, on the Republican side, it seems like Mayor Fung has the clear favorite right now, but you never can tell with these late primaries. And then on the Democratic side, I think the governor has an issue with the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, and that's something that's playing out in Rhode Island and across the country, where progressives are increasingly suspicious of some of these sitting office holders who may not be as progressive on the issues they care about, whether it's European-style health care or whether it's impeaching the president or a number of hot-button issues. But usually if you're a governor, regardless if you're R or D, you want to try and localize the issues because voters are smart enough to separate a lot of the noise down here in Washington from the stuff they really care about from their elected officials at a local level. And I think that's one of the reasons that, despite the President Trump's unpopularity in New England as a whole, four of the region's 6 governors are Republicans right now. And 3 of them are, some polls, all of them are pretty popular. So you can really separate yourself from the national party, for better or worse, if you do your job and offer ideas at a very local core issue.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Governor Raimondo just did issue an attack ad on Fung. Picture both him and his wife down at the inauguration with Trump hat, a Trump scarf on, just tying Fung to Trump. Is that an effective strategy?
I think it is a Democratic playbook. It clearly is. I don't think it necessarily is because voters are smart enough to say, hey, this person is running to talk about state budgets and talk about very local core issues. We're not talking about Supreme Court nominees or government shutdowns. It's just they're 2 separate things. And like that's the reason that these attacks don't work when they try it with, say, Charlie Baker next door in Massachusetts, who polls show is one of the most popular governors in the country, and voters don't associate him with their distaste of Trump. Now, in Rhode Island, Governor Raimondo, her approval ratings are much lower. They're closer to 40, which is not a good place to be if you're an incumbent governor. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the economic issues in the state, and that's where voters really want people their elected officials to focus on. I also think that she's got to be wary. Like a late primary, September 12th, does not give a lot of time. It's an 8-week sprint, give or take, to the general election. So she can't totally take her eye off the left wing because she does have a primary challenge, albeit underfunded, sure, but she does have a challenge from the left who's going to push her on issues, and she needs all of her base to turn out. These midterms are base elections, and both parties right now are focused on turning out their bases.
And what do you think of Joe Trillo? The last poll that GoLocal had done in conjunction with John Della Volpe up at Harvard had Trillo at 16%. Now, when he entered the race as an independent, he got some consternation from the Republican side of things. Is that really the ceiling that you see? Is that as high as Joe could go?
It's always harder in an independent. It's just the way it has been to date. Like, it's very hard to break through. But I think more and more voters are kind of growing weary of both political parties. So I think there could be a lane for independent parties and candidates down the road. I'm not sure it's there yet, but both parties are kind of going or both parties are going back to rushing to their respective bases. So there's going to be a lane up the middle, and that's usually the one that the successful candidates, R or D, thus far are able to kind of seize on it and run on.
What's the sense inside the Beltway with the gubernatorial race here in Rhode Island? Is there a sense that it's in play?
Yeah, I see these RGA releases very regularly, and again, it might be a deep blue part of the country, but I think there's a definite sense of a weakness amongst Governor Raimondo. Again, your approval ratings, a Democratic governor in Rhode Island should not be at 40%, give or take, in approval ratings, while the next door, the Republican governor of Massachusetts, is nearer to 70. So that indicates that voters are unhappy with her performance. And, when you're the incumbent, you own the last 4 years. And if a challenger can make it a referendum on what happened under her watch and offer a compelling vision forward, you can have a shot. It's always better for Republicans to be running in these midterm years because your votes don't get swamped the way they do in the higher turnout of the presidential years. So that is also more favorable, although running in a president's first midterm when you're a member of that party is challenging, no doubt.
Let's talk a little bit nationally, Colin, as well. Let's look at the midterms for 18 here in Congress. What's the sense as we stand here in the beginning of August?
Well, I think it's almost a tale of two different midterms. For the House of Representatives, the fight is taking place in blue and purple parts of the country, where Democratic challengers and the Democratic opposition want to make everything a referendum on President Trump. And in places like Rhode Island and New Jersey, California, and parts of Florida, that can be a compelling message for voters who don't necessarily approve of the president's job approval. And that's why the Republicans are swimming upstream when it comes to some of these House races. But the ace card they have, and always will have, and we're going to see it in Ohio 12 next week, a referendum that Republicans can make on Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is the most disliked politician in the country, and for whatever reason, the Democrats have kept her atop the party for so long and have given the Republicans something to run against. And that works in places like Rhode Island, and that works in the heartland, and that works everywhere. So that's the battle for the House. Both parties are going to make it either a referendum on President Trump or Nancy Pelosi. Now, for the Senate, those battle lines are taking place in far different parts of the country. Okay. And there are 10 Democratic incumbent senators running for re-election in states President Trump won. 4 or 5 of those are running in states he won overwhelmingly. So it's two totally different messages. They can't run against President Trump in places like North Dakota or West Virginia or Missouri, where voters voted for him by 20, 30, in some cases 40 points. So you see those red state Democrats, they're having to run up the middle and try their best to wrap themselves around President Trump, but they're having a little trouble with that because they've got 6 years of votes across the river in the Capitol that are far more liberal than their bases want. So it's just interesting because the two races for the Senate and for the House are taking place in two almost totally different landscapes.
Well, I appreciate taking the time to be able to pick your brain both here in Rhode Island and nationally, Colin. Anything else that you want to add in about the Rhode Island race here? If, say, Fung were to emerge from the Republican primary to face Gina Raimondo, you're sort of an opposition research king. Do you think we'll find out anything new or more pertaining to the governor that folks don't already know?
You never know. I mean, you've seen some of these allegations pop up in the last few weeks. I think, though, the real crux will be is how far left she thinks she needs to go to win her primary in a convincing manner, whereas Mayor Fung can start to try to consolidate. He's got his base and try to start to consolidate some of those independent and swing voters who may not necessarily be in the Republican camp, but may not like the governor's performance and may be willing to give a sensible person another look because, look, the numbers don't lie. The state does not approve, majority does not approve of Governor Raimondo's numbers. That's not a good place to be when you're running for re-election with 4 years of governing to run on.
Well, I appreciate taking the time to pick your brain. We get the perspective here in Rhode Island, but wanted to get it from inside the Beltway from a GOP political operative. Colin Reed, appreciate your taking the time to Skype in today.
Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend.
Okay, thanks. You too. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the Friday noontime show, kicking your weekend off early, starting with former State Representative Ray Rickman with his big view. I'd like to thank my guests today, Peter Nerona, Democratic candidate for Rhode Island Attorney General, and Colin Reed, veteran GOP operative down in D.C. We look forward to seeing you back here in studio next week, but in the meantime, be sure to go on GoLocalProv.com and our Facebook page over the weekend for more sports, lifestyle, news, and more. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.